Now that the year 1 and year 2 Kriya Yoga apprenticeship program has come to a conclusion for the year, I have some time to do some talks for the general public. And in this talk, I'd like to discuss what it means to be a sincere practitioner of Kriya Yoga meditation. Now, when I first was introduced to Kriya Yoga, I was in the final portion of my college education, and someone had introduced me to the book Autobiography of a Yogi. Now, I'd been practicing meditation and interested in meditation before that, which is one of the reasons why they gave me that book. And after I read Autobiography of a Yogi, I knew that the Kriya Yoga path was essentially the path I was meant to commit myself to study and practice. I had talked to the yoga teacher, the Hatha yoga teacher, who had given me Autobiography of a Yogi, and I asked her, I said, well, can you initiate me into Kriya Yoga? Can you teach me Kriya Yoga? Because at the time I didn't have much understanding of the teacher-student relationship, and I assumed anyone who practiced Kriya Yoga could do that. And she laughed and said no, but there are two places you can go to learn Kriya Yoga. The first one was Self-Realization Fellowship, Paramahansa Yogananda's organization, and that was in California. Having not traveled very much, I thought to myself, well, that's a good ways away. I'm just getting done with college. I pretty much have $0 extra dollars for anything beyond rent and food, so that's probably out. And then she said, but I learned Kriya Yoga in Georgia, in the mountains of Georgia, with Roy Eugene Davis, who was a student of Yogananda. He had been trained by Yogananda. He was authorized to teach by Yogananda directly, and he was a self-realization monk during his training. But he had since left the monastic tradition and had his own center in Georgia. So I thought, well, that's still a good ways away. However, seems like a good idea. So I decided to schedule a trip down to Georgia, all the while knowing, I didn't know how I knew, and I didn't really know what it meant, all the while knowing that this was the thing to do. So I made my way down to Georgia, and as I wrote in the book Kriya Yoga, Continuing the Lineage of Enlightenment, the introduction there, my first meeting with Roy Eugene Davis, I went to the retreat, I checked into my room, and the next morning meditation was scheduled to be practiced at 6 a.m. Now, I'd never really done any group meditations, and I had not ever really done any extensive meditations. However, I thought I'd give it a shot. So I went and I sat in the third row back in the middle section of the meditation hall. And when Mr. Davis walked in, I was in a way overcome with emotion. And when I saw him light incense and the candle and honor the pictures of the gurus, the Kriya Yoga teachers, again, this overwhelming sense of being in the right place occurred to me. So we meditated, and I thought I should introduce myself to Mr. Davis. And I'll have to dig up some pictures of me, but I had recently shaved my head probably 6 months before, so I just had spiky hair, and a year or two before that, I had just become a vegetarian, and so I had lost a lot of weight. So like this really skinny, spiky-haired, funny kid. And so I walked up to Mr. Davis, and I went to shake his hand, because I figured that's the appropriate thing to do. And he waved my hand away, kind of smacked it away, and gave me a hug. And I thought to myself, well, that's odd. I don't even know this person. And a few times after that, when I would meet with him, I tried the same thing, and he would do the same thing. And from that point forward, I knew all along, but it reaffirmed the sense of direction with the Kriya Yoga path, this meditation path. And so from the very beginning, I had no questions about doing this. I had no questions about the study of it. And So whatever I learned from Mr. Davis, I applied. Whatever I read in his book, Seven Lessons in Conscious Living, whatever I read in his commentary on the Yoga Sutras, I did my best within my capacity as a kid barely in his 20s to try to apply those things. And I've written about that within the book Kriya Yoga, Continuing Lineage of Enlightenment. I've also written about it in the book Kriya Yoga Vichara, and discussed a little in the 11-hour downloadable course at kriyayogaonline.com. But really, those are just personal things that don't matter a whole lot. I know you want it to matter because personality is interesting and it keeps you engaged, but the further you get along, you realize that it's actually not that important. What's important is applying what you learn, applying the teaching, applying the process. So back to the topic of this video, sincerity in Kriya Yoga practice. What does that mean? Well, it really means that you are, number one, fully engaged in the process. You are committed to meditating every day. You have likely studied at least the first portion of the Yoga Sutras, or you have an understanding of what's called the yamas and niyamas, which are the restraints that a yogi practices, as well as the activities that the yogi practices. And you don't have to call yourself a yogi even. This is just simply what it means to be an authentic human being who's growing into or recognizing their spiritual essence, the spiritual truth, the eternal aspect of themselves. Because the human process, the human body, in a way that's almost like a cocoon. The way a butterfly moves from the caterpillar to a butterfly is going through this stage of transformation. And the human life cycle is really a step in that transformation of realizing the supreme essence. And this is something that we cover extensively in year 2 of the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship program. Well, towards the end of year 1 as well, as we look at the Bhagavad Gita and the insights of the Bhagavad Gita shares. But the idea of being sincere is, are you willing to make the sacrifices to meditate every day, to do whatever it takes to meditate well? Are you aiming to embody what is taught in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Yoga Sutras? Are you willing to listen to the teacher that you have, to apply what that teacher shares? Are you also willing to develop a discernment to determine whether you have the best teacher for you at your current stage of development? That's very important. I feel very blessed in that I only had one teacher. I didn't have to jump around or go searching for anyone. And the influence of Mr. Davis on my life from the very beginning was profound and continues even now. His life as an example was extremely important to me. At first, I tried to emulate him by being like him, dressing like him, acting like him. But then in time, I realized that really wasn't the important thing. The important thing was I embodying the inner state of awareness and consciousness and allowing that to come forth. And that helped with my own sincerity. So to be sincere on this path requires that you be clear on what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, and that you are able to trust your inner guidance. And if you are plagued by things like doubt or despair or traumatic memories or attachment to the past that might not have been so supportive of you, are you willing to do what it takes to release that, to process that, to let go of that, such that you can embody what the Kriya Yoga path wants you to embody? And let me anthropomorphize that. It doesn't really want, but it is a formula, it is a route for recognizing what is always true of you, the real you, not the mind, not the body, not the personality, but that thing, or it's not really a thing even either, that aspect of consciousness which is eternal and pervades all, everything, beyond time even. And of course, you're going to go through stages of growth. You're going to go through stages of growth, where in the beginning, you might have to have a type of devotion where you treat an image or aspect of God with attributes, with reverence, so that you're able to feel that love and that devotion. But in time, as you proceed, you start to recognize that this essence of the divine that you see in this image or idea pervades all things. You have to be willing to move through the stages of spiritual growth, from simply doing what your spiritual teacher says, to then applying what you learn and be willing to make mistakes, to be willing to fall down and get back up, and to recognize your own inner spiritual strength, which is also the strength of the life all around you, which is also the spiritual strength that all of your teachers have realized, brought forth, immersed themselves in. Are you willing to do that? So a sincere practitioner of Kriya Yoga meditates every day, lives a life that is harmonious with nature, with inner well-being, that is also strong, that is willing to do what it takes to essentially make the sacrifices required so that you can meditate well, so that you can be healthy, so that you can be internally peaceful inside. And that's often usually the most challenging part of this whole process. Because what a person gets in their mind after reading Autobiography of a Yogi, or talking to individuals who are still at the beginning stages of the process, they get in their mind that I'm going to learn a meditation technique, and by doing this technique, everything in my life is going to fall into place. When part of the whole spiritual process is recognizing that your life is a reflection of your inner states, and that by organizing and managing your life, you create the proper foundation for the clearest, wisest, most serene aspect of your consciousness to come forth. And so you have to have strength to recognize what do you need to change in your life for that to occur. You have to have the fortitude and the courage to realize that there might be periods of time where you make choices or decisions the people don't around you, and they don't understand it, because they're not trying to recognize or realize the same things you are. And you have to be willing to develop that courage to walk through that, to get to the other side, because you want to be self-reliant, and that's with a capital S, as in your inner self. You don't want to be reliant on transient, changing circumstances, situations, and people around you, because they're going to come and they're going to go. You have to have courage to do that. You have to recognize, realize that that is important. That is an important part of this whole process. Yogananda, Roy Davis, Sri Yukteswar, they embodied a life where, as Yogananda told Mr. Davis, don't look to the left, don't look to the right, don't look behind you, look straight ahead and go all the way to self-realization. They lived a life where that was the driving motto or axiom, and because of it, they were able to bring forth, recognize, realize what this whole spiritual process is about. And so you have to ask yourself, do I want to be content with human circumstances? Do I want to be attached to them? Do I want to be driven by them? Do I want to experience life the way the majority of humans in this world do? And if so, that's fine. Or are you sincere? Do you really mean that you want to know what your spiritual heroes know, what your spiritual mentors know? Do you want to know what all those mystical texts point to, what they say is possible? Do you want that? If so, then you will do whatever it takes to make that a reality. And of course, I know all too well that that can also drive us to certain forms of fanaticism, so you want to avoid that. But usually that works out in the end. You go one way fanatically, then you realize that's not quite it, then you go another way, until eventually you come to a point of balance, and you see that it's not quite as extreme or dramatic. It's more of, about developing internal poise than anything else. But if you want that, then you've got the capacity for understanding how to be sincere on your meditation awakening path. And as a very worthy thing, all these books, most of the things that I have learned through the Kriya Yoga practice, I've written down in Kriya Yoga, Continuing Lineage of Enlightenment, Kriya Yoga Vichara, Mahavatar Babaji in the Garden of Faith, the Course in Tranquility. So you have these, and it's a limited number of pages, and that's one of the things that many spiritual people get caught up in, is they're looking for the next book, or they're looking for the next talk, or they're looking for the next class, or they're looking for the next teacher. That's because they're still caught up in their mind. Whereas if you would just take one truth, and they talk about this in the Yoga Sutras, if you'd take one truth and embody that, that would be enough. So really all the books that I've written, I think it's too much. It could be much simpler. However, just like you have to give someone sugar to swallow sour medicine sometimes, and sometimes spirituality can appear to be sour medicine, especially if you are really identified with the personality and the mind, you do need more words to encapsulate it. But I want to encourage you to simplify your process, to simplify your practice. Now, there's a reason that Yogananda told Mr. Davis to only read his books for the first few years. It wasn't because he didn't want Mr. Davis to read or to, broaden his mind. It was simply because if he could understand what Yogananda was sharing, and by focusing only on Yogananda's books, of course, that's all you're going to be immersed in, then he would develop discernment to understand what he read in other texts, to kind of separate the fluff from the actual content that you need. So it's all about discernment there. And simplicity is key in that regard. As I've said before, especially when it comes to meditation, I think I wrote this in the Course in Tranquility, the more complicated a meditation practice or process is, oftentimes the less advanced it is, even though we tend to think of it the other way around. So take some time to consider, are you sincere about your process? Are you meditating every day, whether you like it or not? Are you learning to enjoy meditation? Because once you get into it and you really do it well, you're not doing it mechanically, it does become something that you very much enjoy. Are you keeping your life simple, and are you arranging your life in such a way that you are minimizing drama, that you are making choices that, to the best of your ability, supports a healthy, happy lifestyle? Now again, for all of us, things come up which are challenges that we could not prevent, sometimes even foresee. So we all have to deal with those. That's part of the ripening process. That's part of going through this cocoon of human life, as I described. You can to take care of what you can, essentially. Are you doing that? Do you have access to accurate information about the process of the magicalness of it, the magical thinking of it? And are you really willing to get down and do the work that is required as is described in books like the Yoga Sutras, the Bhagavad Gita? Are you willing to do the work that teachers like Yogananda, Roy Davis has said, this is what you need to do? Meaning, are you reading their text or listening to their talks or their lectures instead of just being, oh, well, that's nice. This is, instead of just treating it like some kind of of course, it's better than other kinds of entertainment, I suppose. But instead of just treating it like entertainment, are you listening to the lectures, reading the books, and when you and listening and paying attention to what you're reading and hearing, and saying, okay, am I doing this? Am I applying this? Do I understand this? And if not, you ask yourself, what do I need to do to get on board with that, to understand that, to apply that? And are you focusing on that for a long enough time to get the hang of it? And then going deeper into the lecture and seeing what the next point is. This is how you demonstrate sincerity on your path. So, take advantage of what is available to you. There are lectures available to you. There are books available to you. There are teachers and training programs available to you. But you need to do the work and hold yourself accountable to what you're doing. Because even if you have the best spiritual teacher in the world, you know, if they're older than you, and most of the time they are, they're not going to be there forever in the physical form. Just like a child has to learn from their parents how to be a good adult, how to be a self-sufficient adult, because one day that parent's not going to be there. So are you willing to grow into spiritual maturity to realize and recognize what your teachers know, what is the whole culmination of the mystical experience? Are you willing to do that such that it's natural to you? There's no question about it. If you are, then that's fantastic, spiritually speaking. And that indicates your sincerity on this path. So, take some time to reflect. Think about your weeks and months ahead, and schedule time to sit down and make a plan about how you're going to organize your life, how you're going to practice meditation, and do that regularly. And then your sincerity will be obvious.